today. Today's episode is Rule Changes, as we are joined by our regular participant in Colin Wilson. Colin is a 2 times Commonwealth medalist and a TV broadcaster. You're back with us again for the 4th or the 5th time. As I said, you've 2 Commonwealth medalists, TV broadcaster. What have you been doing since we was last on the Zoom?
And I still help to look after Smash down in Kettering, and I'm still working as an executive coach, management consultant, leadership developer.
Yeah. And how can people get hold of you, Colin? Just by email or?
Yeah, find me on Facebook, Colin Wilson 374, or on LinkedIn, Colin Wilson 62. If anyone wants to email me, you can do at info@businessathlete.co.uk. That's info@businessathlete.co.uk.
And the first rule change we're going to look at is long before I was playing, the table tennis net was 6.5 inches high. Games were going on till 2 o'clock in the morning as people were terrified of hitting. And in order to speed the game up, they dropped the net from 6.5 inches to 6 inches, which is 15.2 centimetres, I believe. And was that a good move? I'll start with Colin, or a bad move, or somewhere in between.
Okay, well, you've in a way you started with a difficult time in the 100 years that we've had since table tennis really got going. So Table Tennis England just had its 100th anniversary, 2021, I think, so it's 1921. The International Table Tennis Federation had its beginnings 1926. Based in London, obviously, then spread quickly throughout the world. But you were getting spectator groups of 10,000 plus at Wembley Arena back in the 30s, and there were some fantastic times after the vellum period, with the sandpaper bat era, with the short pimple no sponge era. Some wonderful play, some wonderful rallies. Lengths of rallies were great. And then it gradually moved, with the net being as high as it was, to a dominance of the defensive player. Then the rallies were getting too long. It was less dynamic to play, less dynamic certainly to watch. And that's where you mentioned that they decided to reduce the height of the net, which I think was an inevitability. And given the change of ability and training methods, and the bats that they were using with short rubber pimples, couldn't get much spin, but you could get about 8% of what you can get now. So you're starting to get a little bit of spin. And as a result of that, it was the right thing to do to reduce the height of the net. Although I'll come back to it later, because maybe we should go the other way now.
Like Colin, you just touched on that. Back to you. Then would you raise it again? And then would it be 6.5 inches, 7 inches? Would you make the table bigger, smaller?
Yeah, okay.
Let's just stick with the net.
Big questions. In terms of what Roger's saying about the shortening the rallies, they did achieve that by expedite. Yeah. The problem with that is if the game balance is such that the defensive player has an advantage, you end up with a kind of a holding serve kind of situation where people lose on their serve, the other person loses on their serve, the other person. So yes, it was a solution to longer rallies. I'm not sure it's a complete solution, and obviously, that's what we're debating. Because of the heavy topspin that reversed sandwich rubber in the modern times can do, you're effectively creating an upside down aeroplane wing. So the ball goes over the net, dive bombs down into the table. So effectively, it makes the net lower. So would I do anything about that now? Well, I think we'll probably talk about the ball size. Which was an attempt to lengthen the rallies again, because the rallies were getting very, very short. Like one World Championships, the average rally was 2.2 shots each. Which is not great for spectators. Very, 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 very technical, very, very skilled, but not very visual to the casual observer, which is part of what we want as the marketing the sport. I would consider raising the net, although there's some nuances to it, because there are some fantastic rallies on YouTube, but most of the rallies are still pretty short. So I think on average, I would raise the net. And the question is how much you would do that. As Roger says, attackers would be happy with that. Well, to a point, and Roger and I can debate this. Where is that point? I think it starts to probably have an impact at probably just under half an inch, I would say. But what you'd need is an experiment over maybe 12 months, because the game and the tactics and the players will, of course, they will game the system and learn how to do it. So a one-off event to try and prove something won't work. You need a process over a period of time for the tactics to evolve and stabilize.
Well, in 21 to 11,
short answer, yes, very good move. I think, again, from a spectator's point of view, just waiting a long time for an inevitability isn't that interesting relative to having more crunch points. So if someone's winning 11-3 and you can see that one person's better than the other, but it's going to go all the way to 21, then everyone kind of switches off. It's just a bit of a non-event. Whereas with 11, there's always the chance that there's always a much greater chance that someone can get to 11. I interviewed Fan Zhendong at the Copper Box at the World Team Cup 2018. Chinese superstar, one of my absolute favorites of all time. And I said, well, you beat so-and-so, South Korean player, but it wasn't 4-0, it was 4-1. Was that a problem to you? And what's the expectation from your Chinese team and coaches about winning 4-1, not 4-0? And he smiled and he said, yeah. He says, in the old days there was pressure to win and win handsomely. He said, but these days, he said, it's okay if I lose one game. If I win 4-1 in a best of 7, he says, for me that's perfectly acceptable, and for everyone else it's perfectly acceptable as well. He says the other players are really good, and you're only playing up to 11. So they accept that they are going to drop games. They'd hope that they wouldn't drop 4 of them in a best of 7 all at the same time.
2 services, 3 service, the whole game.
Yeah. So we've gone down from 5 serves up to 21, down to 2 serves up to 11. Let's look at the extremes with 11. You could have one person serving all the time in an up to 11, a little bit like a tennis game. 15 love, 30 love, 40 love game. It's 4 you've got to win, whereas table tennis it would be 11. I think in table tennis, typically at most levels, service is an advantage, and so over 11 or 11 for the winner, 20. It's a 20-point game if it goes to 10 all, for instance, plus. I think that if it's a significant advantage to the server, then you're just going to end up with the server winning every game. Then it's 1 game all, then it's 2-1, then it's 2 all, and you'd have to end up with some kind of tie break at some point in the future. Again, too much inevitability about it. In some games, service is a disadvantage, just between any 2 players, clash of styles or levels or what have you, and the same problem applies. So do we need to limit it? Yes. Do we need to limit it less than 5? Well, the other end of the scale, you'd have 1 each, 1 serve each. Then you can't do what Roger's talking about, which is build a momentum up to a serve or a range of disguised serves that you want to do. And I would agree with that. Again, not just game balance, but for the spectator, you've got you want to build a bit of a narrative. You've got a story to the game. And if you have 1 serve each, 1 serve each, I think you don't get that sense of familiarity from the casual observer as to what's actually going on. There's more going on than they can see. And that's always been a key problem for table tennis and its relationship with spectators. So I wouldn't go to 1 either. We have 2 at the moment. Would I go to 5? No, because it might just push too much advantage one way. So I kind of like your idea of 3 at a time.
From an umpire's point of view, when there's 2, who's meant to be serving from the score.
Yes,
that's true. Yes.
With 3, I go, hang on, who's meant to be, because it does happen, the wrong person serves sometimes.
No, with 2-1 who service it.
At least, with 2,
Yeah, you soon get used to it, because with two, it's multiples of two. It's an even number. Where you've only got to say in your mind, let me divide this by 3. It's 3. I don't know. It's 6-3, and therefore it's bound to be. It's 7-2. It can't be changes. Anyway, let's move on. And
I'm all for making the umpire's job easier.
And I'm not all for making it harder. And I'm grateful to thousands of Rogers over the years that have umpired my games. So I do understand that the demand on the umpire is something that you don't want to take for granted. Right. So yes, there was a rule change. A ball was 38 millimeters diameter. They decided to make it 40 millimeters diameter. They thought about it for, I don't know, a couple of years seriously, and then implemented this change. Let's go back to the reason for the change. The reason for the change was to lengthen the rallies, because the rallies were said to be coming too short, which I agreed with. My view, my argument, my evidence was that if you wanted to lengthen the rallies, changing the ball from 38 mil diameter to add 1 mil on each side to make it 40 mil diameter would make a negligible difference. And would also reduce the amount of spin and make it more of a grunt power game rather than a subtle spin tactical game. Maybe because I'm not that big physically and I was quite good with my kind of touch skills, 38 mil just suited me better. So maybe I would say that, wouldn't I? But I did believe it, and I think it's proved to be the case. I said it'd have no impact on the length of the rallies, and I don't see any evidence that's been put forward that the rallies have got longer as a result, and I've seen plenty of short rally games with 40 mil. What they should have done is raise the net.
And the other example is one we used when we did the rehearsal. It was often said by the players who were sort of 10 or 15 years older than me that the modern player wouldn't live in the hard bat age. So back in the 10, 15, 20 years ago, Colin Wilson and Graham Sandley entered the hard bat championships, in which it was the British Championships. Colin will correct me if I've got that title wrong. And therefore, Colin and Graham had to compete with a hard bat against the Henry Buiss of the world and the Peter Pickfords and even Dennis Neal, obviously, was a hard bat player. And therefore, Colin and Graham, as expected, were to go out in the first round because they couldn't cope with this dramatic change, going back to proper table tennis. And guess what? The final was between Colin Wilson and Graham Sandley, and Colin won it and became the British hard bat champion. Go on, just give us a couple of minutes on that, Colin, and then we'll move on.
Okay. So modern players are often accused of not having the skill of the classical game with the hard bats and no sponge. And we said, yeah, fine. We just didn't really believe it, but people wanted to believe that. It's very nostalgic. But we were getting a bit of stick for just being modern players that could just use our wrist to flick the spin onto the ball, and it's very different these days. So we said, hang on a minute, we've played for England. We're allowed to go in the International Club Hard Bat Championships. That's anyone that had played hard bat for their country internationally was allowed to play in it. I don't know if it was English, British, world, but it was all international players from the era. Clearly, Graham and I were a little bit younger, but Stuart Gibbs was still playing fantastic sandwich bat table tennis. He was in it. Jeff Ingber was in it. Some of the people that you mentioned. And I thought I had a bit of an easy draw, and I did fine. Then in between matches, I'd watch Graham Sandley, and he beat Stuart Gibbs, who was highly ranked with a sponge bat still. Never mind an international with a hard bat. He beat him like 21-14, 21-6. He pinned him up against the wall and just pancaked him all over the place. And it was great to watch. And in the final, Graham and I played, and I decided that to beat Graham, what I needed to do was stay very close to the table, get as much topspin as I could. And I basically did kind of mini loops off the bounce, very early, heavy topspins, given you couldn't get much spin, but it was enough to make the ball kick and dip. And yeah, sure enough, I won it. Later, I got a world ranking of 16. and later again, I was often in the sandpaper bat events, and I was commentating at the Alexandra Palace year after year on the sandpaper World Championships in my when I was a bit too old to keep up with the top players. But absolutely loved it. Ewan Walker, he won up to 21. He won with a 40mm ball. He won because he's good at table tennis.
Brilliant.
There are some basic principles behind this.
A big thanks to Roger, and a big thanks to Colin, and we'll see you again soon.